She's mine. I saw her
No
first.
way.
She's with me now.
Stop it, both of you!
You can't have her. Watch me.
Who are you?
It doesn't matter. Let's have fun tonight.
It's my first time.
I will be gentle. I thought you said you were a virgin. Chuckles.
I don't know what happened.
Hi everyone, welcome to Afro-Korean Studio. In today's episode, we follow the story of Chioma, a black woman caught in a dangerous attraction between two powerful Korean bosses. Discover the twists, tension, and complexity of her situation, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to support me because it gives me the motivation to create more exciting stories like this. Chioma Nwosu had been in Seoul for less than 12 hours, and already the city felt like it was breathing around her, fast, bright, and alive in a way she hadn't prepared for. She barely had time to unpack before rushing to Shinhwa Corporation's Welcome Gala, the mandatory event for all Global Innovation Fellows. Stepping into the ballroom of the Shinhwa Grand Hotel, she felt as if she had entered another world entirely. Chioma stood at the entrance for a moment, letting the scene wash over her. She wasn't used to this level of opulence, but she forced her shoulders back, lifted her chin, and reminded herself she had earned this place. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. She accepted a glass, hoping it would settle her nerves. One sip softened her tension. The second warmed her chest. The third made the crowded room blur just enough to feel less intimidating. By the time she moved toward the bar, her head was pleasantly light. She wasn't expecting anyone to speak to her. Most guests seemed familiar with each other, greeting one another with practiced smiles. So when a quiet voice behind her said, "You look like you want to escape," she turned too quickly, and almost dropped her drink. He caught her wrist gently, steadying her before she stumbled. "Careful," he murmured. Her eyes met his, and she froze. He didn't look like anyone else at the party. Where others glowed under the lights, he seemed half hidden in them. His black suit fit too well, his hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his gaze held a depth that made her forget the room for a moment. She couldn't see his face clearly, yet the mystery made him even more striking. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Just overwhelmed." "That makes two of us," he replied, releasing her wrist slowly, almost reluctantly. She laughed softly, more to ease her own nerves than anything else. "You don't look overwhelmed." "I hide it well." There was something magnetic about the way he spoke, calm, low, and slightly amused. And with every sip of champagne, Chioma found herself leaning into that magnetic pull. They drifted toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, talking without effort. Or maybe they weren't talking much at all. Time became fuzzy, a blend of his deep voice and the warmth building between them. At some point, she realized she hadn't asked his name. At another, she realized he hadn't asked hers either. The anonymity made everything easier, lighter, and strangely intimate. He brushed a curl away from her face without thinking, and she didn't pull back. "Do you want some air?" he asked. She nodded. Her body answered before her thoughts could. The hallway outside the ballroom was dimmer, quieter, filled with the distant echo of music. She felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet, whether from the alcohol or his presence she couldn't tell. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped inside together. The moment the doors slid shut, silence wrapped around them like a spell. He looked at her. She looked back. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or sloppy. It was deep, purposeful, as if he had been waiting all evening. The warmth of his lips spread through her chest, sparking something she had never felt so instantly. She clutched his suit jacket, pulling him closer, while his hands framed her waist with a certainty that sent her thoughts spinning. The elevator dinged. They barely separated as they stepped out, their breaths mingling as they moved blindly down the hallway. She didn't remember which door opened or how they made it inside, only the soft thud of it closing behind them and the slow way his lips found hers again. The night blurred into heat, shadows, and whispered sounds she wouldn't dare repeat to anyone. She never saw his full face. He never turned on the light. And when she woke just before dawn, her heart racing and her head pounding, she knew only one thing. She had to leave before reality returned. She dressed quietly, slipping out while he slept. No names exchanged. No faces clearly seen. No promises made. Just a night that wasn't meant to follow her. By 9 a.m., she stood before the towering headquarters of Shinhwa Corporation, praying the headache pulsing behind her eyes wouldn't betray her exhaustion. The building stretched toward the sky like a blade, gleaming with power. She inhaled deeply, smoothing the front of her blouse, and forced the memory of last night into a locked corner of her mind. This was her real purpose, the fellowship. Her future. The lobby was a world of precision, glass walls, metal accents, and employees who walked as if every second mattered. After signing in, she received her temporary pass and rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The doors opened, and she stepped into a silence that felt more judgmental than welcoming. A tall man turned toward her. Min-jae. CEO in training. He looked like someone carved from cool marble, sharp jawline, perfectly tailored suit, the kind of confidence that didn't need to speak to be felt. He regarded her with a steady gaze, and for a moment she wondered if they had crossed paths before. But no. That was impossible. Miss Nwosu, he said, bowing slightly. We're glad to have you here. His voice was deep, familiar in a way she couldn't place. It sent a small shiver down her spine before she shook it off. Then Seok-Jin, the CFO, entered. His warm personality filled the room like sunlight. He smiled at her, teasing Min-jae in a way that revealed their opposing temperaments. The dynamic between them made her nervous, but at least Seok-Jin made the environment feel less icy. The day unfolded quickly. She was introduced to teams, shown her desk, briefed on expectations that sounded almost impossible. She learned that Shinhwa Corporation ran on ambition, and ambition alone. Everyone moved with purpose, and everyone watched her carefully. Especially assistant manager Hisu. Hisu greeted her with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. If you need anything, don't hesitate, she said sweetly. I love helping new employees settle in. Yet later, Chioma found 2 important training files missing from her system. The schedule Hisu had emailed her contained errors that would make her look incompetent. And when Chioma passed Hisu's desk, she heard her whispering to another employee. She won't last a month. So much for friendliness. Then, as if the day needed more complications, Chioma met Hyun. Hyun was stunning, coldly elegant, poised like someone born to stand above others. She approached Chioma with a faint smile, her sharp eyes assessing her from head to toe. You must be the fellow everyone is talking about, she said. Chioma smiled politely. I hope it's good talk. We'll see, Hyun replied. Shinhwa can be unpredictable. She walked away before Chioma could respond. Only later did Chioma learn who she truly was. Min-jae's ex-girlfriend. And from the lingering glance Hyun had thrown toward Min-jae earlier, it was clear she was not over him. By late afternoon, Chioma finally sat at her desk, exhausted from the weight of first impressions and silent rivalries. She opened her laptop, ready to review her tasks. A notification appeared immediately. Black notice, private. Her pulse tightened. She clicked it, expecting a routine confidentiality warning. But instead, a single message filled the screen. You are being watched. Be careful who you trust. She stared at the words, brows knitting, breath shallow. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't generic. It was a warning. From who? For what? Her gaze moved slowly across the office. Everyone typed. Everyone pretended not to notice her. But she felt it, eyes she couldn't see, observing her every move. Her first night in Seoul had started with mystery. Her first day at Shinhwa ended with danger. And Chioma suddenly understood. She hadn't walked into a fellowship. She had walked into a battlefield. 2 weeks later, Chioma started to face some challenges at Shinhwa Corporation. It was just like how she had expected it, but she hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly, or so sharply. The hallways no longer felt overwhelmingly grand, instead, they seemed to watch her with quiet judgment. Conversations she once brushed off now sounded pointed, calculated, and far too observant for comfort. Yet she kept her head high, determined to hold her place in a company where every step felt like a test. Today, however, was different. Today, she would sit in her first boardroom briefing. The thought alone made her palms damp as she stood before the tall glass doors of the 40th floor conference hall. She inhaled deeply, steadying her breath. She had prepared for this meeting all night, reviewing data points until her eyes burned. She didn't intend to embarrass herself, not after the rocky start she had survived. But as soon as she stepped into the boardroom, all her worries disappeared under a new one. Min-jae was staring at her. Not directly, not openly, just with a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before he looked away too quickly. It startled her more than the 20 unfamiliar executives who turned to examine her with quiet curiosity. Chioma bowed respectfully and moved to her seat beside Seok-Jin, who gave her an encouraging smile that immediately eased the tightness in her chest. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "Just breathe." But she wasn't sure breathing would help, not when Min-jae sat at the head of the long glass table looking like a man carved from discipline, yet somehow distracted from her. He didn't seem to know why he kept glancing her way, and Chioma didn't know he was doing it at all. She focused on her documents, refusing to let her nerves show. But across the table, Min-jae's jaw flexed as he watched the top of her lowered head, frustration tightening his features. He had no reason to be distracted by the new fellow. There were dozens of employees he interacted with daily, ambitious, talented, well-connected people who sought his attention. Yet none of them occupied the corner of his mind like Chioma did. It irritated him. It confused him. And it lingered like a quiet itch he couldn't scratch. The meeting began with introductions, formal greetings, and updates from division leaders. Chioma followed each point carefully, mentally rehearsing the moment she would be called upon. She wanted to prove herself worthy of the fellowship, and she wanted to show the executives she wasn't merely a symbolic international hire. When her turn finally came, her stomach clenched, but her voice remained steady. As requested, she began, "I reviewed the market projections for the Smart Logistics Expansion Initiative. Based on recent data, I believe the initial model underestimates the demand curve in West African markets. Adjusting the predictive framework by even 3% shows opportunity for significant additional revenue." Some executives stiffened. Others glanced at each other. No one spoke. Except one. Hisu. "Well," Hisu said with a tight smile, "I believe the intern, the fellow, might be mixing up the numbers." That model was verified by senior analysts. Perhaps she misread the update? Seok-Jin's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. Before Chioma could respond, he cut in. "No," Seok-Jin said firmly. "I reviewed her numbers myself. They're correct. Her projections are stronger than the original model." The room shifted. Executives who had dismissed Chioma moments earlier now eyed her with mild interest. Min-jae, who had remained silent so far, leaned back slowly, studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Continue, Miss Nwosu," he said, his voice calm but focused. She continued, walking them through the refined prediction model. Her confidence grew with each sentence. She spoke clearly, answered questions with precision, and followed every challenge with supported evidence. By the time she finished, the room filled with quiet murmurs, and something that almost resembled approval. Min-jae nodded once. "Good work." Just 2 words. But they vibrated through her like a pulse of relief. Seok-Jin grinned at her, patting her notebook under the table like a proud older brother. The warmth of his approval settled her nerves, grounding her after the intense presentation. But across the room, someone else was watching. Ha-yun. Her expression was too smooth, too perfectly controlled, as her eyes followed the subtle connection between Chioma, Min-jae, and Seok-Jin. She sat near the PR representatives, her elegant posture stiffening when she saw Min-jae's gaze stray to Chioma one time too many. She didn't miss the irritation tightening his jaw whenever Seok-Jin leaned close to offer Chioma guidance. She didn't miss the faint warmth in Chioma's smile toward the CFO. And most of all, she didn't miss the flicker of something soft, almost unguarded, in Min-jae's usually cold eyes. It was the first crack she had seen in him since their breakup. A crack she despised. And she already knew who she would blame. After the meeting, Chioma exhaled deeply in the hallway, relieved the pressure had finally lifted. Seok-Jin joined her, clapping lightly. "See? I told you you'd be fine." She laughed softly. "I almost fainted." "But you didn't," he replied, smiling warmly. "You held your ground. That's what matters." Their conversation was brief but comforting, enough for Chioma to feel her confidence solidify again. Yet while they spoke, Min-jae walked past them, stopping for the slightest moment before continuing without a word. His heart had thudded once, sharp, uninvited, when he heard Chioma laugh. He had no explanation for it. And he hated that. Word of her boardroom performance spread faster than she expected. By lunch, whispers followed her through the halls. Some were impressed. Others are suspicious and a few resentful. Hyun, however, took a different route. She did not whisper. She stirred the soil until small rumors began to sprout. "She's too close to the CFO. She thinks she's better than the Korean employees. She's playing up her foreign charm to get attention. She only got the fellowship because of diversity quotas." None of these claims were spoken directly to Chioma. Instead, they traveled behind her like shadows, quiet, multiplied, reshaped, and repeated by people she didn't know. Colleagues who greeted her warmly before now smiled a little tighter. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Hisu seemed particularly delighted by how quickly the atmosphere shifted, and Hyun took note of every person willing to feed the tension. Chioma remained unaware, yet her instincts tingled with the sense that something had changed. Something subtle. Something cold. Later that afternoon, she stepped into the break room for tea, and nearly collided with Hyun. "Oh," Chioma said softly, steadying herself. "I didn't see you." Hyun smiled politely, though her eyes held no warmth. "Be careful," she replied gently. "You might bump into the wrong people in this company." The words were innocent on the surface. But the tone wasn't. Chioma blinked, unsure whether it was advice or a threat. Before she could respond, Hyun's gaze dropped to Chioma's delicate gold bracelet, one her little sister had given her before she traveled. "Pretty," Hyun murmured. "But fragile things don't last long here." She walked away before Chioma could say a word. The air left in her wake felt colder. Throughout the day, Min-jae found himself noticing Chioma without meaning to. The way she tucked a curl behind her ear when she concentrated. The quiet determination in her eyes when she worked. The lingering worry she tried to hide beneath polite smiles. Every time he caught himself looking, irritation flared through him. He didn't have the luxury of distraction. And he certainly didn't have space in his life for fascination, not with someone who complicated things simply by existing. Yet even as he told himself to ignore her, his gaze drifted toward her again. There was something about her he couldn't look away from. Something he didn't understand. And that unsettled him. Chioma, unaware of his internal tension and Hyun's spreading schemes, simply tried to survive the day. But as evening approached, she felt the shift more clearly. Conversations quieted when she walked by. Eyes lingered too long. Smiles thinned. And when she met Hyun's gaze across the hallway, something passed between them, silent, sharp, unmistakably hostile. A tension that would not end quietly, and it was also a tension that was just beginning. By Chioma's 16th day at Shinhwa Corporation, she had learned one truth very quickly: the company thrived on pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to prove yourself, pressure to anticipate disasters before they arrived. But nothing prepared her for the morning the rival company, Min-jae, launched its first attack. It began quietly, just small system lags, glitches so subtle most people brushed them off as routine maintenance issues. But Chioma noticed the unusual pattern almost immediately. The delays were too calculated, the timing too synchronized across departments. Something was wrong, and it was spreading far faster than coincidence allowed. She rushed to her workstation, fingers moving quickly across her keyboard as she analyzed the digital traffic. Within seconds, a cold realization hit her. Mi-Tech's cyber division was breaching Shinhwa's network, inching toward the Innovation Hub server, where sensitive blueprints and confidential prototypes were stored. If they broke through, Shinhwa would be finished. She didn't hesitate. Pulling up the firewall manipulation interface, she created a diversion route to trap the attack in a sealed loop while simultaneously triggering an emergency encryption protocol. She worked fast, faster than she had ever moved in her life, her pulse thundering in her ears as the threat counter climbed into red. A final key press. A single breath. Then the attack stopped. The countdown froze, the servers stabilized, and the network slowly began to breathe again. Chioma leaned back in her chair, her heart racing, her palms slick with sweat. She had just prevented a catastrophe Shinhwa might never have recovered from. But she wasn't thinking about credit. All she wanted was a minute to breathe. She didn't get one. The alarm blared across the office, summoning employees to the 40th floor boardroom. Within minutes, Chioma found herself seated among shaken executives and panicked managers. Min-jae entered last, eyes sharp, posture cold, radiating authority even in crisis. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice like steel. All eyes turned to Chioma. She wasn't ready for that. But Seok-Jin spoke up. It was an external breach. Mi-Tech. And Chioma stopped it. The room shifted immediately. Shock. Curiosity. Relief. A hint of new respect. And Min-jae, something else. His gaze lingered on Chioma with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. It wasn't admiration alone, it was something deeper, more conflicted, as though recognizing her brilliance only deepened an internal struggle he didn't want to acknowledge. But not everyone celebrated. Hee-soo, standing rigidly near the projector, looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. She had never liked Chioma, but now, with Chioma unexpectedly in the company spotlight, her dislike sharpened into something harsher. Worse still, Hee-soo wasn't acting alone. Because sitting quietly near the door, listening but pretending not to, was Hyun. Her expression didn't change. Her breath didn't hitch. Her posture didn't falter. But her eyes, those eyes, sparked with a darkness Chioma didn't see. Opportunity. The moment the meeting ended, Hyun slipped away to the PR corridor, her heels clicking with purpose. She didn't need evidence to cause damage. She needed suggestion. She needed whispers. And she needed a perfect villain, someone who didn't belong, someone easy to target. Someone like Chioma. Within hours, rumors began threading through the building like smoke. Claims that the cyberattack had been staged. Questions about how Chioma noticed the breach too quickly. Accusations that she manipulated the situation to gain recognition. No one said these lies openly. They lived in private chats, whispered conversations, and skeptical glances. And Chioma felt the shift immediately. Her colleagues' smiles thinned again. Conversations around her paused when she entered her room. Hee-soo offered fake sympathy disguised as concern, asking loudly whether Chioma had any background in cyber operations that would explain her suspiciously fast reaction. Chioma tried to ignore it, but the tension hung above her like a storm cloud. Worse, something else was wrong. Her body felt strange these past few days. Too tired. Too nauseous. Too unlike herself. When she missed her period, panic settled in her chest. No. She told herself it was stress. Jet lag. Workload. Everything except the truth she was afraid to face. But doubt followed her everywhere, into meetings, through presentations, even into the restroom where she stood staring at her shaking hands. She didn't know the man's name. She didn't know his face. She didn't know anything except the fragments of a night she had tried desperately to forget. If she was pregnant, she wouldn't even know who the father was. The thought hollowed her. Meanwhile, Min-jae found himself pulled toward her again and again, no matter how much he resisted the instinct. He began noticing small things, how her expression dimmed when she thought no one was looking, how she pressed a hand to her stomach when she thought she was alone, how exhaustion had crept into her posture. He wanted to ask if she was all right. He wanted to understand why she occupied his thoughts. But obsession wasn't something he wanted to feel, especially not for an employee under his supervision. Still, his eyes found her in every room, every meeting, every hallway. He couldn't help it. And every time Seok-Jin stepped in to help Chioma, a subtle heat curled in Min-jae's chest, a heat he didn't recognize as jealousy but felt too strongly to ignore. Seok-Jin noticed both of them. And he knew enough to keep quiet. He supported Chioma in silence, shielding her from Hisu's passive-aggressive strikes and redirecting meetings whenever discussions grew unfairly pointed. He didn't confront the rumors directly, but he countered them by praising Chioma's skill publicly, pushing her work into visibility so lies would lose ground. Yet even his efforts couldn't drown the growing sense of dread curling in Chioma's stomach. Because more than rumors, more than sabotage, more than office politics, she feared the faint possibility she carried a child. A child whose father was a stranger. A child born from a night she barely remembered. The moment came late one evening. The office was quiet, the hallways empty except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Chioma sat alone in the restroom, holding the pregnancy test she'd bought on impulse during her lunch break. Her hands trembled as she watched the results appear. One line. Then another. Her breath caught. Her vision blurred. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying. She was pregnant. The world tilted under her feet, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She wasn't ready. She hadn't planned this. And worst of all, she didn't know who the father was. When she finally stepped out of the restroom, pale and shaken, she didn't know Ha-yeon was waiting at the corner of the hallway, arms crossed, gaze sharp enough to cut glass. The exhaustion in Chioma's eyes, the unsteady steps, Ha-yeon saw everything. And she smiled. A slow, cold, dangerous smile. She had new ammunition now. And she would use it. Her plan was already forming, a strategy to expose, embarrass, and humiliate Chioma publicly. A move that would destroy her credibility and push her out of Shinhwa for good. All she needed was the right moment. And as Chioma walked past her, clutching the truth she could not speak, Ha-yeon decided that moment was very, very close. The storm had begun. And Chioma had no idea what was coming. She always believed that pressure revealed a person's true character, but she had never imagined the kind of pressure she would face on the day Shinhwa Corporation nearly collapsed from the inside out. It began with a single warning notification across the security dashboards, an alert so small that most employees would have dismissed it as routine traffic. But Chioma had spent weeks studying Shinhwa's systems, memorizing their natural rhythms, and she sensed immediately that something was wrong. The data flow was too heavy, too fast, too targeted. Someone was trying to break through the company's deepest vault of confidential information. She pushed her chair closer to her screen and began working, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she traced the intrusion pattern. The attack was stronger than the one she had stopped weeks earlier. It wasn't careless or experimental. This one was strategic, coordinated, and clearly funded by a rival powerful enough to threaten Shinhwa at its core. Within minutes, other departments began panicking as their systems started shutting down. Files vanished. The lights flickered. Alarms echoed throughout the building as executives scrambled to understand what was happening. Chioma barely heard the chaos, her entire focus was locked on the swirling code in front of her. She issued emergency blocks, reinforced firewalls, and diverted power to protect the systems that mattered most. But the attack kept pushing back, breaking through minor defenses and searching desperately for a weak point. A sudden crash behind her made her jump. Min-jae burst into the room, breathless and furious, demanding updates. His tie hung loose, his sleeves were rolled up, and the intensity in his eyes reminded Chioma why people called him Shinhwa's future steel. "We're under full attack," she said, not looking away from the screen. "But I can contain it if I can get to the central core on the lower level." That area's already compromised, he warned, stepping closer. Someone tampered with the electrical locks. I have to go, she insisted. If they get into the central core, we lose everything. He didn't hesitate. Then I'm going with you. They hurried through the darkened corridors, the emergency lights casting red shadows across the walls. As they reached the stairs leading to the central core, a loud explosion echoed somewhere in the building. Smoke drifted upward. The sprinklers kicked in. Chioma's heart pounded with fear, but Min-jae stayed in front of her, shielding her as they moved deeper underground. When they reached the secured hallway, Chioma rushed toward the control panel, connecting her tablet to override the system. She didn't realize danger was still near until she heard a metallic creak above her. Chioma, move! Min-jae lunged, grabbing her by the waist just as part of the overhead piping system gave way. Heavy steel crashed down where she had been standing, shards and debris flying in every direction. She felt herself pulled to the floor beneath him, his arms wrapping around her head and shoulders to protect her. The impact of the falling metal echoed through the hallway, followed by Min-jae's sharp cry of pain. She froze. He wasn't moving. Chioma scrambled up, panic choking her as she saw blood spreading across his sleeve. A jagged piece of metal had torn through the fabric and cut deep into his arm and shoulder. Min-jae, stay awake, she whispered, shaking him slightly. He winced. I told you, that area was unstable. You saved my life, she breathed. He gave a strained half-smile. Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed. Despite the blood, despite the danger still surrounding them, Chioma felt something she couldn't name stir inside her chest. But she didn't have time to think about it. She tore her gaze away and ran to the panel. Hold on, she said. I'll fix this. Min-jae leaned against the wall, clutching his injury while Chioma worked faster than she had ever worked before. She initiated a system reboot from the central core, isolating the malicious code and trapping it within a quarantined digital chamber. The network trembled, fought back, then finally succumbed to her commands. A final keystroke, and silence. The attack had been stopped. The crisis was over. But the moment she stepped away from the panel, Hisu stormed in with a team of emergency responders, and instead of relief, her eyes were flooded with hostility. You, she snapped, pointing at Chioma. You were in charge of the innovation hub. You should have prevented this before it began. I just saved the company. Because you failed to detect the breach earlier. Hisu hissed. Your negligence put Shinhwa in jeopardy. Chioma opened her mouth to defend herself, but Hisu had already turned her back. The paramedics moved around Min-jae, lifting him onto a stretcher, but he kept his eyes on Chioma. And that was enough to fuel Hisu's rage further. As Min-jae was taken away, Chioma's victory dissolved into cold dread. She had stopped the sabotage, but she had made new enemies, powerful enemies who wouldn't forgive the spotlight she'd accidentally claimed. Worse still, Ha-yeon saw everything. She saw Chioma stepping out of the chaos alive. She saw Min-jae looking at her like she mattered. And she saw opportunity crack open again. Within hours, she twisted the story into a media frenzy. Reports leaked online claiming Chioma's inexperience had caused security vulnerabilities. Comments speculated she had mishandled confidential information. Someone even posted edited footage implying she abandoned her workstation moments before the attack began. Ha-yeon fed every rumor with calculated precision. And the company swallowed the lies greedily. By the next morning, international tech forums were calling Chioma reckless, manipulative, and dangerously unqualified. Her world collapsed quickly. But there was one more blow waiting. Seok-Jin confronted her in a private conference room, slamming a file onto the table. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded. Chioma froze. Tell you what? He opened the file, hospital results she hadn't meant for him to see. Pregnancy confirmation. Estimated conception date. The night of the welcome party. Is this why you've been acting strange? He asked, his voice shaking. Is this why you've been hiding things? Tears stung her eyes. I didn't know how to say it. At first I was angry, he admitted, his jaw tight. Not because you're pregnant, but because you were going through all of this alone. She blinked at him. You don't hate me? No, he sighed, sitting across from her. I'm going to help you. You don't deserve what they're doing to you. His support broke her completely. And when the PR division released yet another false story about her, one claiming she purposely caused the crisis, Chioma realized something else. She wasn't safe in Korea anymore. The lies were too deep. The attacks were too coordinated. And her pregnancy made everything 1,000 times riskier. Late that night, she packed her things quietly, her hands trembling as she folded the last pieces of her life and soul into a single suitcase. She didn't tell Min-jae. He was still recovering. And she couldn't bear to face him when she was hiding something so monumental, something that would shatter his world if he ever learned the truth. At the airport, she looked back only once, letting the city lights blur through her tears. She was leaving behind chaos. She was leaving behind danger. She was leaving behind a man who had saved her life without knowing he had been part of her story long before he met her. And as her plane took off into the night, Ayun stood in her office, watching news updates with a cold, victorious smile. Chioma was gone. But the war she started was far from over. 3 years had passed, but Seoul felt strangely familiar as Chioma stepped out of the airport, her luggage rolling smoothly behind her, her posture steadier than it had ever been. The wind was colder than she remembered, the streets busier, the skyline brighter, yet everything felt smaller compared to the storms she had survived. She had left Korea as a frightened woman carrying a secret she couldn't face. She was returning as the CEO of NOVA Shield, her own African-Asian cybersecurity empire that had risen faster than analysts could predict. The world now spoke her name with respect. And Shinhwa, whether they liked it or not, needed her. The global tech summit Shinhwa was hosting had attracted competitors, investors, and international leaders. It was the crown jewel of the year, one that could determine alliances for the next decade. When they reached out to NOVA Shield requesting Chioma as a panel speaker and guest of honor, she knew her return would not go unnoticed. She also knew she could no longer avoid the ghosts she left behind. Her car stopped at the iconic Shinhwa Tower, towering into the sky like a blade cutting through clouds. She stepped out, heels clicking against marble, chin lifted with calm confidence. Despite the memories clawing at her chest, she walked forward with the grace of someone who no longer feared being watched, judged, or destroyed. Inside the lobby, whispers immediately followed her. Is that Chioma Nwosu? She's back? She looks different, stronger. And then she saw him. Calm Min-jae. He stood across the room, dressed sharply in a tailored black suit, now officially CEO of Shinhwa Corporation. His eyes, colder and more controlled than before, locked onto hers the moment she entered. For a heartbeat, the world felt suspended between them, a collision inevitable, powerful, and years overdue. But Min-jae recovered first. Ms. Nwosu, he said evenly, stepping toward her. Welcome back to Shinhwa. Thank you, CEO Kang, she replied with an equally steady tone. It's good to see the company thriving. His gaze flickered, just briefly, at her poise, her confidence, the way she no longer flinched in his presence. I wasn't informed you would be attending in person. My company thought it best for me to represent us, she said smoothly. We've grown since you last saw me. That's an understatement, he murmured. Their exchange was professional, clipped, and unbearably tense, but beneath the surface, something deeper churned. Min-jae didn't know why her presence unsettled him, only that it did. For 3 years he had tried to forget the anonymous woman from that night, the one who haunted him even though he had never seen her face clearly. For 3 years, he had pushed away the faint, inexplicable ache that told him something in his life was missing. Now, standing before Chioma, the feeling returned stronger than ever. Before either could speak again, Ayun appeared, gliding smoothly toward them like a shadow that refused to stay in the past. Chioma, she said sweetly, her smile as artificial as glass. How surprising to see you here. I would have expected you to hide a little longer. Chioma didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She lifted her brow with the calm confidence of someone who no longer feared snakes. I don't hide, Chioma replied gently. But I understand why you might think so. You spent 3 years hoping I wouldn't come back. Ha-yeon's smile cracked for a second. Min-jae watched them with sharp curiosity. Something about Chioma's strength threw him off balance. This wasn't the woman he once protected in a burning hallway. This was someone reborn. Ha-yeon attempted to recover her footing. Regardless of how you've grown, I hope you know Shinhwa isn't as easy to manipulate as before. Good, Chioma said. I'm not here to manipulate anything. I'm here to contribute, something you've never quite known how to do without destroying someone else. The lobby went silent. Min-jae blinked, taken aback. Ha-yeon froze, her cheeks reddening with humiliation. 3 years ago, Chioma would have apologized. Now, she didn't bow to anyone. As Chioma walked past them toward the summit hall, several Shinhwa employees stared at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had changed completely, her confidence, her elegance, her strategic mind, it all radiated effortlessly. And soon, her transformation began impacting more than rumors. During the opening sessions of the summit, Chioma delivered her presentation with unmatched clarity, demonstrating innovations NOVA Shield had developed that placed them 3 years ahead of the global cybersecurity curve. Investors were captivated. Rivals were intimidated. Even Min-jae, who prided himself on control, found himself listening too intently, watching too closely, analyzing every word she spoke. But professional admiration wasn't the only emotion swirling in the room. Ha-yeon watched Chioma from a corner, her jaw tight, her eyes full of fury. She couldn't stand that Chioma's brilliance overshadowed her. And she refused to accept that Min-jae's attention kept drifting toward the very woman she had tried to destroy years ago. So, she struck. During the press hour, she leaked a manipulated internal memo implying NOVA Shield had been involved in controversial hacking strategies to gain market dominance. She expected the scandal to erupt instantly. But Chioma didn't panic. Instead, she smiled. Because this time, she wasn't alone. Shinhwa's new legal director, an ally Chioma had built a partnership with, stepped forward publicly, exposing the memo as falsified. Tech journalists quickly found the inconsistencies. And one of NovaShield's analysts released digital proof tying the leak to Ha-yeon's department. Within 1 hour, Ha-yeon was the one questioned by reporters. Within 2, she was escorted away for internal investigation. Within 3, she was publicly humiliated, the downfall she had feared for years finally catching up to her. Min-jae watched the chaos unfold, stunned not only by Ha-yeon's desperation but by Chioma's composure. She operated like a leader who had learned to fight fire with precision, not fear. And strangely, his chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to admiration. Later that evening, Seok-Jin found her waiting in the summit lounge, a glass of water in her hand. He hesitated before approaching, unsure whether she still held resentment for his past anger. But when she looked up at him, her expression softened. You look older, she teased. And you look unstoppable, he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, their conversation flowed easily. Seok-Jin apologized for the hurt he caused, for the pressure he placed on her, for the moments he wasn't there when she needed him most. But Chioma only shook her head gently. It's in the past, she said. We both survived. He nodded, relief washing over him. I'm glad you're back. She smiled. For now. Neither noticed Min-jae standing nearby, listening as he tried to piece together the fragments of Chioma's life he had never known. The final blow, the moment everything collided, came at the summit's closing ceremony. Chioma's daughter wandered into the hall. A small girl with Min-jae's eyes. Min-jae froze, the world tilting beneath him as the child looked up, her curly hair bouncing lightly, her dimples matching his perfectly. He didn't breathe. He couldn't. The truth hit him like a punch to the lungs. The night he never forgot. The face he had never seen that haunted his dreams. The connection he couldn't explain. It had always been Chioma. His one-night stand. His missing memory. His child. His daughter. He turned toward Chioma with shock, pain, awe, and something dangerously close to hope trembling in his expression. "Chioma," he whispered. "She's mine." Chioma's breath trembled, her heart racing with fear and relief all at once. She nodded slowly, unable to deny the truth anymore. "Yes," she whispered. "She's yours." The hall faded around them. The summit, the crowd, the tension, the past, it all dissolved as they stood facing each other, the truth finally free. And from the side, Hisu watched silently. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked defeated, then accepting. Because she finally understood, Chioma was Min-jae's equal, his match, his partner, his destiny. And nothing she did could change that. As Ha-yeon disappeared under the weight of her own downfall, Min-jae stepped closer to Chioma, eyes softening with a mixture of regret, longing, and undeniable love. 3 years, he breathed. 3 years I searched for something I didn't understand, and it was you. Chioma swallowed hard. 3 years I tried to protect her from this world. And now? He asked gently. Now, she thought. Now everything begins again. Slowly, she reached for his hand. Their reunion was not quiet. It was dramatic and powerful. The story that once broke them had finally begun to bring them home. Thank you for watching this episode from Afro Korean Studios. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.